Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, and in this RedGamingTech.com video, we're going to be discussing, as well as analysing, well, you know what we're going to be discussing and analysing, you read the title. And by golly gosh, I think this has been one of those pieces of news I've been really looking forward to delivering. I've actually been sitting on some of this information for quite a while, and some of it I have just recently received from a couple of my sources. Before we go any further, I'd like to stress that this information is not official from AMD, and it is from sources, but those sources have been fairly accurate in the past. If you're a regular viewer, you'll know that a lot of the AMD information on the channel has been exceptionally accurate. Everything from the Ryzen 3000 and first generation Navi release dates, the fact that RDNA 2 would have hardware-based ray tracing, we leaked the Radeon 7 renders and the fact that gamers would get 7nm Vega, we leaked a lot of the X570 platform details and so on, plus a ton of other stuff. So I'm fairly confident with this information, at least the vast majority of it, because the source has again been accurate in the past. I have been asked to not detail certain things, so I have to be a little careful with how I phrase certain aspects of this video, because I just don't want to get A, anyone into trouble, and B, I don't feel it's fair to just completely and utterly ruin AMD's strategy going in, so there will be some things I will be omitting here. But with that said, some of this information I hinted at in yesterday's video of whether AMD could be competitive with Nvidia. In that video I basically just said that I was guessing a lot of this stuff, but I had been fed some of this information previously, as actually some of you guessed. But with that said, let's jump into it. So this is going to be a mixture of AMD RDNA 2 primarily, but also a tiny bit of Zen 3, but we'll get to that in a moment. So first things first, it's imperative to realise that the specs right now, in terms of, let's say, clock frequencies, are not final yet. It's looking like by the end of the month, we will have preliminary specifications for Navi 21, which is the highest end SKU. And then after that, it may be perhaps a week or so later, it will be final specifications for Navi 21 based cards. This means that performance targets, as we're going to be discussing in a moment, it's kind of wishy-washy exactly how well they compete against Ampere at different classes, because ultimately, A, Ampere is not launched yet, and B, RDNA 2 is not launched yet, as well as the fact that drivers may improve, and the final thing is that the clock frequencies internally from AMD may vary. They have not 100% decided yet. I suspect they're trying to balance things like power consumption, heat, and all of this stuff. AMD seem, from my information, to be aiming to be lower power consumption than Nvidia. So they are going to be, you know, I wouldn't say sipping power. I have leaked previously it could be up to about 250 watts, but it's still not as much energy consumption as Nvidia. With that said, AMD may choose to crank things up a bit if they feel that it would give them a competitive edge in a specific class of GPU. Personally, as a desktop enthusiast, I don't really give so much of a rat's ass of power consumption. Again, I know that's not a popular opinion necessarily with everyone, but it's just how I feel. I'm happy as long as the card is not really obnoxiously loud. Nvidia seem to have sorted out their cooling solution, which is definitely great, and I think Ampere is a really nice series of GPUs. I do. I think Ampere is amazing. But I am here to tell you that AMD will be competitive. Let's start things out with the bad news, and that's the 6700. It will compete with the RTX 3070. The bad news is that this card, it's looking like it's not going to launch this year. I'm hearing it's going to be Q1 next year. And the good news is, though, the card is quite competitive with the 3070. Furthermore, I'm hearing it is more power efficient than the 3070. Now we have the higher end SKUs. So the 6800 and the 6900 respectively. Again, these GPUs are designed to compete with Nvidia's higher end SKUs, for example the 3080. However, AMD themselves, from what I understand, are not 100% certain how they will perform against Ampere because final clocks are not yet decided, and obviously we don't have all of the information for Ampere either. I think Nvidia might have the edge in the 3090. That seems to be how things are coming across right now, but it's not 100% clear. I was told that the RX 6800 and the RX 6900 will launch around October. One of my sources seemed to imply that October was the release timeframe for the GPUs, and another seemed to indicate that it could slip until early November. I believe that October is more likely, but I'm just saying exactly what I was told, around October. Before we go any further, it's worth noting that I don't have an exact announcement date yet, but I am hearing that both the Ryzen 4000 series, just to be clear, these are the Zen 3 desktop CPUs that we're referring to here, as well as the next generation of RDNA will both be announced at the same event. I'm not so certain if they're going to share a simultaneous release date. AMD did do this, of course, with the Ryzen 3000 series and RDNA 1, but whether they're going to do the same thing again, I just honestly don't know. There are, however, still a ton of questions that we have for these GPUs. Again, it's looking like they're going to be roughly on par with the Ampere GPUs, perhaps with the exception of the 3090, which may pip them to the post, but they are going to be more power efficient. The question is, though, how about hardware-based ray tracing performance? We don't know at this point. Nvidia made a stellar leap with Ampere and hardware-based ray tracing. Now, I know what folks are going to say. I only care about traditional rasterization performance, I get that, but what about in 1-2 years' time, especially when we see games like Cyberpunk? Who knows? I think, and this is from a different source, who honestly I don't have as much faith in, but I think that Nvidia will probably lose in hardware-based ray tracing performance with Turing against RDNA 2, but I don't think they're going to lose against them with Ampere. I think Ampere, simply because of the differences in the architecture, they're probably going to have the advantage. Another question is, what about features like DLSS, Deep Learning Supersampling? In my opinion, is a massive, massive positive for AMD to go up against. Nvidia's DLSS is really stellar. I do think, though, that there is a good chance that AMD could achieve much the same thing. We've learned, for example, that the lower precision operations on the Xbox can basically help upsample with machine learning, so maybe AMD can employ the same thing, or possibly combine that with some type of improved Radeon image sharpening. Again, I'm not privy to those that information at the moment, so unfortunately it's very difficult for me to answer how that will come to the fray. Nvidia have also naturally announced a whole bunch of other stuff, like, for example, minimizing system latency and all of this stuff. How AMD will compete with that, we just don't know. I think, and this is a lot of guesswork on my part, I think AMD will be cheaper. I think they will be probably a little more power efficient, but I think Nvidia will probably have the edge in certain tiers, certain types of performance. I think, for example, hardware-based ray tracing, Nvidia will have the advantage. This is not inside information, this is guessing. And I do believe that folks who want like DLSS or Nvidia Studio or whatever may be better served to go with Nvidia. This is one of those instances where if Ampere had been even 10%, 15% slower, AMD would definitely have had a performance advantage. As it is, Ampere is amazing. The good news is, though, for us as end users, well, guess what? Yeah, AMD's offerings are amazing too. And this is great news for AMD owners, or AMD fans. This is one of those situations where if you don't like Nvidia's ecosystem, for whatever reason, you are good. You have a GPU which is going to be a little cheaper, it's looking like, than Nvidia's offerings, but maybe a little slower in certain games. Again, this is a battleground though right now because, again, the final specs are not decided yet. So for all we know, there could be an extra 100 megahertz or whatever, 200 megahertz in the clocks, and all of this changes. And AIB cards, as we all know as well, can make a huge difference here, as well as driver updates, blah, blah, blah. I suspect some games, as always, will favour the Nvidia architecture. Some games, as always, will favour the AMD architecture. I also want to add a little more to the pricing situation. Because the specs themselves have not been 100% set in stone, there is a possibility that the prices may adjust. Currently, the plan is for AMD to undercut Nvidia, but if AMD feels that their offerings are faster than Nvidia, or at least as competitive, perhaps that may change. It becomes even more difficult to know when you start taking into account AIB custom GPUs. Ultimately, I think it will be very interesting to see what AMD's strategy is going forward, especially with different VRAM configurations. After all, we know that Nvidia are planning different VRAM configurations with the Ampere series of GPUs, and I think there's a very good chance that AMD will do much the same for the RX 6000 series too. As for the Ryzen 4000 series, I think they're going to be impressive. I've been hearing from some people that Zen 3 from Zen 2 makes Zen 2 look kind of bad, especially in single thread performance and game performance. I can't verify that, and they're not a regular source, so I would go into it with not quite that level of expectation. But logically, I think that Zen 3 is going to be a nice bump over Zen 2. So, for example, if you happen to have like a 1700X or something like that you've been sitting on, maybe a 2700, and you've been kind of putting off the move to a PCIe 4 based system and are considering plonking in like a 4700, now would be a really good time. And I think you can make a very good argument that a 6700 or an RTX 3070 type of GPU, combine that with a 4700 or maybe a 4600, depending on clock speeds and performance, you know what? I can see that that would be an absolutely stellar build. And I personally believe that the mid-range, the 6700 and the 3070, will outperform the Xbox Series X and the PlayStation 5 by quite a good margin. This is actually awesome news for PC gamers. I'm really happy with what Nvidia and AMD have done here. I think that this is absolutely fantastic. Whichever one ends up being the fastest, I think that fans of the other side will be really happy, and this is not just me being PR-y. I genuinely think that we're in an amazing situation in PC gaming right now. There are some questions still. What about decompression technology? I think Nvidia having RTX I/O is a sign of where the industry is going to be moving, and it wouldn't surprise me if AMD has this, but I don't know for certain. And obviously, being able to offload decompressing data from like a PCIe 4 class SSD, which could be like 7 Gbps, it makes sense for RDNA 2 to have this, especially given what, of course, AMD have been doing for Sony and Microsoft. But again, I'm not 100% certain of that, so don't go in expecting it necessarily. Either way, I'm really happy. I'm very much looking forward to official information of RDNA 2, official confirmation, and I'm so looking forward to getting my hands on the new generation of cards. There are a lot of questions from Nvidia's lineup as well. We know that there are other GPUs that Nvidia have not shown off. We know that there's a 3070 Super, or a Ti, whatever it ends up being called. It's almost certain that there's going to be a 3080 Super Ti, whatever. We don't know what the configuration of that is going to be. We can make guesses. Again, we don't know the final configuration. I wouldn't be surprised if it ends up being 20 gigabytes of RAM, as we've seen some rumours that the 3080 has 20 gigabytes of RAM. I wouldn't be surprised if the 20 gigabyte model is running with higher clock frequency on the RAM, and also has perhaps more CUDA cores enabled. That is not a leak, that's a guess from my part. Either way, I will be going more extensively into information as I'm allowed to share it, and as I get more information. There is some more stuff I do know, especially how Zen 3 compares against a couple of Intel's chips, but I've been asked to keep that quiet for now, so maybe as we get a bit closer to launch, I'll be able to talk about that a little bit more freely. But hopefully, though, you've enjoyed the video. The normal stuff, if you did, like, share, comment, and definitely subscribe. I'm actually recording the audio now for Hot Chips. All of the script is done, so that will be up. There's a couple of other really cool videos coming up on the channel. So yeah, thanks very much for watching. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now.